The lecture hall stretched 300 meters across and could hold 5,000 cadets from every corner of the Galactic Coalition. Marcus Chen sat in the middle section among beings that looked nothing like him and tried to pay attention to instructor Vreltoth as the four-armed Korthan veteran paced before the massive holographic display. Around Marcus sat creatures with scales, with crystalline bodies, with tentacles, with forms that shifted between states of matter, and some that existed partially in dimensions his human eyes couldn't fully perceive. He'd been at the Galactic Military Academy for 3 months now, and still felt like the new kid, despite being one of 47 humans in a class of over 2,000. Vreltoth's voice boomed through the hall, without need for amplification, because his species had evolved to communicate across vast distances. "Today we discuss the Void Striders," Vreltoth announced, as the lights dimmed. Holographic display flickered to life, and showed footage that made several cadets shift uncomfortably in their seats. The creatures on screen looked like nightmares given form and purpose. They stood roughly 3 meters tall, with bodies that seemed to be made of living shadow, wrapped around something mechanical and organic at once. Their limbs bent in ways that violated geometry, and their heads had no faces, but rather swirling vortexes of darkness. Marcus leaned forward as the footage showed a Void Strider walking through a solid wall, as if it didn't exist. "The Void Striders first appeared 23 years ago," Vreltoth continued, as the hologram showed a colony world burning. "Since then, they have destroyed 17 colonies and killed over 2 million Coalition citizens." The next footage showed military forces engaging the creatures. Plasma bolts fired from rifles passed through them like they were made of smoke. From orbital platforms hit them directly, but the creatures simply absorbed the energy and kept moving. One Strider was hit by a particle beam that could cut through a battleship's armor, and it barely slowed down. "No weapon in our arsenal can stop them," Vreltoth said, and his tone carried the weight of personal experience. "They phase through matter at will and regenerate from any damage within seconds." Marcus watched a Strider get hit by an antimatter charge, and saw it blown apart, only to reform moments later from the scattered shadows. "They absorb energy in all forms," the instructor went on. "Plasma, laser, electromagnetic pulse, radiation, even kinetic energy fields. All useless." A cadet near the front raised a clawed hand. "What about molecular disruption?" she asked in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. "Tried it," Vreltoth replied. "They exist partially outside normal space, so molecular weapons can't establish a field. Lock." Another cadet spoke up from the back. "Temporal weapons? Banned by Coalition law and also ineffective," Vreltoth said. "The Striders move through time as easily as they move through space." Marcus raised his hand slowly, and Vreltoth's 4 eyes focused on him. "Yes, Cadet Chen?" "Have we tried simple ballistic weapons?" Marcus asked. "Like solid projectiles instead of energy beams." Several cadets turned to look at him, and a few made sounds that might have been laughter in their native languages. Vreltoth's expression was patient, but dismissive in the way teachers get when answering an obvious question. "We abandoned such primitive technology over 3,000 years ago," the instructor said. "Energy weapons are far superior in every measurable way." "But have we tried them against the Striders?" Marcus pressed. "Against an enemy that phases through matter and absorbs energy?" Massive head. P. What would be the point? Besides, even if a projectile could somehow hit them, they regenerate too quickly for it to matter. Marcus wanted to ask more questions, but the looks from other cadets told him to drop it. He was already known as the human who asked too many questions and challenged accepted wisdom. Vreltoth continued the lecture and showed footage of evacuation procedures. When Void Striders are detected, the protocol is immediate civilian evacuation, followed by orbital sterilization of the affected area, he explained. We cannot stop them, so we must remove what they want and deny them targets. The hologram showed a beautiful colony world, with floating cities and vast forests. Then it showed the same world after orbital bombardment, and there was nothing left but scorched rock. This is the only proven method, Vreltoth said quietly. We save who we can and destroy what we must. The lecture continued for another hour, covering detection methods, evacuation logistics, and psychological preparation for losing entire worlds. Marcus took notes, but his mind kept going back to those creatures, phasing through walls and absorbing plasma fire. Something about it bothered him, like an itch he couldn't scratch. When the lecture ended, the cadets filed out in groups, organized by species or planet of origin. Marcus walked alone, because the other humans were in different sections. A voice called out behind him in surprisingly clear English, "You actually think chemical propellants could work?" Marcus turned to see his roommate Crixal moving toward him. The Zephian looked like a walking crystal sculpture with facets that caught the light and made rainbow patterns on the walls. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but it seems weird that nobody's tried it." "They probably tried it 3,000 years ago, and it didn't work," Crixal said. "The Coalition has been fighting wars since before humans discovered fire, and they've tested every weapon concept imaginable." "Maybe," Marcus said. "Or maybe they tested it against enemies that energy weapons already worked on, and never thought to go back to basics." Crixal made a sound like wind through crystal caves, which Marcus had learned was Zephian laughter. "You humans are stubborn," his roommate said. "Is it stubbornness or just curiosity?" Marcus replied. They walked together toward the residential section, and past memorial walls covered with names of those lost to the Void Striders. Marcus stopped to read them, and recognized several species names from his xenobiology classes. "My parents almost emigrated to Threshold Colony," Crixal said quietly. "That was the 5th world the Striders hit, and they chose to stay on the homeworld instead." Marcus didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. They continued walking in silence until they reached their shared. The room was standard Academy issue, with bunks that could be configured for different body types and a study area with holographic displays. Marcus immediately went to his console and started searching the Academy's database. "What are you doing?" Crixal asked. "Research," Marcus said. "The instructor said no weapon can stop them, but I want to see the actual test data." He pulled up classified files on Void Strider encounters and started reading through combat reports. Every engagement showed the same pattern, with energy weapons failing completely. But nowhere in any report did he see mention of projectile weapons or chemical explosives or any of the pre-spaceflight technology that humans had used for thousands of years. "This is interesting," Marcus muttered. "What is?" Crixal came over to look at his screen. "Look at this footage," Marcus said, and played a video in slow motion. "Watch how the Strider moves when it phases." The creature walked through a wall, and for just a fraction of a second, its body seemed to solidify right before contact. "So?" Crixal asked. "So maybe it has to become solid to interact with matter," Marcus said, "even if it's just for a microsecond." "You're reaching," Crixal said, but he sounded less certain. Marcus continued searching and pulled up files on human military history from before first contact with the Coalition. Firearms, artillery, explosives, chemical weapons, biological agents, all the ugly efficient tools humanity had invented to fight itself. These were considered obsolete the moment we joined the Coalition, Marcus said. But what if obsolete just means untried against the right enemy? He looked at Crixal, and his roommate's crystalline face was unreadable. "You're really going to pursue this?" Crixal asked. "What else am I going to do?" Marcus replied. "Colonies died, and we can't do anything but run." Outside their window the stars glittered against the black, and somewhere out there the Void Striders were hunting. Marcus turned back to his research and started making notes. If the Coalition wouldn't test old weapons against new threats, then maybe a stubborn human cadet would do it himself. Marcus spent the next 3 days buried in research, while his other classes suffered. He pulled data from the Coalition military archives and cross-referenced it with human historical databases that most cadets never bothered to access. What he found was fascinating and disturbing in equal measure. The Galactic Coalition had unified its military doctrine over 3 millennia ago after the Great Consolidation Wars. Every species contributed their best technology, and the Coalition analyzed everything and determined that energy-based weapons were superior in every category. Plasma had better penetration than bullets. Lasers were more accurate than projectiles. Particle beams hit harder than any chemical explosive. The math was indisputable, and the old ways were abandoned. Kinetic weapons became museum pieces, and chemical propellants were relegated to industrial uses. The entire galaxy moved on and never looked back. Noticed something in the historical data. The enemies they'd fought during the Consolidation Wars and every conflict since then had been vulnerable to energy weapons. The Coalition had spent 3,000 years fighting threats that their superior technology could handle. Then the Void Striders appeared, and suddenly superior didn't mean effective. Marcus pulled up schematics for human firearms from Earth's 21st century. The designs were simple and brutal, with metal projectiles propelled by controlled explosions. No shields could stop them because they weren't energy. No absorption field could negate them because they were just mass moving fast. He found designs for grenades that spread fragments in killing patterns, and artillery that could level buildings, and rifles that could punch through body armor. Humanity had been very good at killing itself before the Coalition showed up and taught them better ways. At that screen for 6 hours, Crixall said from his bunk. I need to test something, Marcus replied. Test what exactly? Crixall asked. Marcus turned to face his roommate and tried to put his thoughts into words. The Coalition abandoned kinetic weapons because energy weapons worked better against everything they fought, he said. But the Striders phase through matter and absorb energy. So what if they're vulnerable to the one thing nobody's using anymore? That's a big what if, Crixall pointed out. It's a testable what if, Marcus countered. The Academy has experimental ranges for testing new weapon concepts, and I want to requisition time to try modified kinetic weapons. You'll need instructor approval for that, Crixall said. I know. Marcus stood up and checked the time. Vreltov has office hours in 20 minutes. The walk to the instructor's office gave Marcus time to organize his arguments. He passed cadets from a dozen worlds and wondered how many of them had lost someone to the Void Striders. The door to Vreltov's office was open, and the massive Korthon sat behind a desk designed for his four-armed frame. Cadet Chen. Vreltov's voice was neutral. I've been expecting you. Sir, Marcus stepped inside. You've been accessing historical weapon data and Void Strider combat reports, Vreltov said. The system flags unusual research patterns, and yours certainly qualifies. Marcus felt his face heat up, but pushed forward. Sir, I believe we should test kinetic weapons against the Striders. Vreltov leaned back in his chair, and his four eyes studied Marcus with an expression that might have been curiosity or pity. Explain your reasoning, the instructor said. Marcus pulled up his tablet and displayed his research. Every Void Strider encounter shows them phasing through solid matter and absorbing energy attacks. But look at this frame-by-frame analysis of their movement. He showed the footage he'd studied with Crixall. Right here, they seem to briefly solidify when interacting with physical objects. Marcus pointed at the screen. What if they can't phase and absorb simultaneously? What if a fast-moving projectile could hit them during that transition? Vreltov was silent for a long moment. That's an interesting theory, he finally said. But even if true, how would a simple bullet stop a creature that regenerates from antimatter explosions? Maybe it wouldn't stop them, Marcus admitted. but it might slow them down or force them to expend energy differently. He pulled up more data. Look at human pre-contact warfare. We used volume of fire, explosive fragmentation, and chemical reactions that don't rely on energy absorption. Primitive methods, Vreltov said, but his tone wasn't dismissive anymore. Different methods, Marcus corrected. Sir, what if the answer isn't more advanced technology, but older, simpler approaches that the Striders never evolved to counter? Vreltov stood and walked to the window that overlooked the Academy's main campus. Quietly. 23 years of losing colonies and evacuating millions, and watching worlds burn. He turned back to Marcus. Do you know why I'm so hard on cadets when teaching about the Striders? No, sir, Marcus said. Because I was there when they first appeared. Vreltov's voice carried old pain. I commanded a battalion on Threshold Colony and watched my soldiers die while their weapons did nothing. He sat back down heavily. If there's even a small chance you're right, we have to test it, Vreltov said. I'll approve your request for range time. Marcus felt relief flood through him. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Vreltov warned. If this doesn't work, you'll be known as the cadet who wasted Academy resources on ancient weapons. I can live with that, sir, Marcus said. 2 days later, Marcus stood in Experimental Range 7 with Krixall and 3 other cadets who'd volunteered to help. The range was massive, with holographic targets and simulation systems that could recreate any combat scenario. Marcus had spent the previous 2 days fabricating weapons using the Academy's manufacturing systems. The machines were designed to create energy weapons, but Marcus had modified them to produce something much simpler. He'd created a rifle based on Earth designs from 300 years ago. It used chemical propellants to fire solid metal projectiles at supersonic speeds. The design was crude by Coalition standards, but that was the point. Simple meant fewer things that could go wrong. Is that thing safe? Asked Torvin, a 6-limbed hexapod whose species had natural armor plating. Safe enough, Marcus said, and loaded a magazine of ammunition he'd manufactured. The simulation is ready, announced Yella, a Quellan whose species had telepathic abilities. I've programmed it to replicate Void Strider phase shift capabilities based on combat footage. A holographic Strider materialized at the far end of the range. It looked just like the ones from Vreltov's lecture, with its shadow-wrapped form and impossible geometry. Remember, this is just a simulation, Krixall said. It might behave completely differently from the real thing. Only one way to find out, Marcus said. He raised the rifle and sighted down the barrel. The weight was familiar, because he'd grown up hunting with his grandfather in Montana before joining the Academy. His finger found the trigger, and he controlled his breathing the way he'd been taught as a kid. The rifle kicked against his shoulder, and the crack of the gunshot echoed through the range. The projectile flew downrange at 800 meters per second. The holographic Strider started to phase, but the bullet hit before it could fully shift. The creature staggered. Everyone stared in silence. That just work? Torvin asked. Run diagnostic, Marcus said to Yella. The Quellan's eyes went distant as she interfaced with the simulation system. The projectile penetrated the phase shift field, she reported. The simulation registers it as a successful hit with moderate damage. Moderate isn't enough, Krixall pointed out. The real Striders regenerate in seconds. Then we need more firepower, Marcus said. He adjusted his aim and fired 3 rounds in rapid succession. All 3 hit, and the holographic Strider actually went down. It's not regenerating as fast, Yella said with surprise in her voice. The kinetic damage is affecting its recovery rate, she added. Word spread quickly through the Academy. By the next day, over 50 cadets had gathered at the range to watch. Marcus demonstrated different approaches with single shots, burst fire, and what humans called suppressive fire. He fabricated larger ammunition and showed how explosive rounds could create fragmentation patterns. This is remarkable, said an elderly Thexian professor who'd been studying xenobiology for 2 centuries. The Striders evolved to counter energy weapons, but kinetic attacks bypassed their defensive adaptations entirely. Vreltoth arrived on the third day of testing and watched in silence as Marcus ran through various scenarios. "It works in simulation," the instructor finally said. "But simulation isn't reality." "I know, sir." Marcus lowered his rifle. "The real test would require actual combat." Vreltoth's expression was grim. "That may come sooner than we'd like," he said. "There's been a detection." The range went silent. "Void Striders have been spotted in the Epsilon 7 system," Vreltoth continued. "The colony has 40,000 residents, and evacuation is already underway." He looked at Marcus directly. "Command is assembling a response force, and I've recommended you be included." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Sir, I'm a first-year cadet." "You're the cadet who might have found a weakness in an enemy we've been running from for 2 decades, Vreltoth said. "Pack your gear and report to the hangar in 6 hours." After the instructor left, Crixall turned to Marcus. "You realize if you're wrong, people might die because resources were spent on your theory," his roommate said. "I know," Marcus said quietly. "And if I'm right, we might actually save them." He looked at the rifle in his hands and thought about all the humans who'd carried similar weapons throughout history. They'd been tools of war and survival, and sometimes the only thing standing between people and things that wanted to kill them. Maybe it was humanity's turn to bring those old tools back and show the galaxy that sometimes the best answer wasn't the newest one. "Let's get to work," Marcus said. "We have 6 hours to build an arsenal." The academy became a whirlwind of activity as the response force assembled. Marcus had never seen a military deployment up close, and the scale was staggering. 3 cruisers, 12 frigates, and 200 combat-ready personnel from 40 different species. He should have felt honored to be included, but mostly he felt terrified. "You're really going through with this?" Crixall asked as they hurried through the corridors. "Don't have much choice now," Marcus replied. They reached the fabrication labs, where Marcus had been given emergency access to manufacturing equipment. The machines hummed and sparked as they produced weapons that hadn't been made in Coalition space for thousands of years. "This is insane," said Torvin, as he watched a rifle take shape in the molecular assembler. "The whole galaxy abandoned these designs, and we're betting lives on them." "We're betting lives either way," Marcus said. "At least this way, we're trying something new." Yella emerged from a side room, carrying data tablets. "I've analyzed the simulation results and uploaded them to the combat database," she said. "If your theory works, we'll have tactical data to support it." "If it works," Torvin repeated darkly. Marcus ignored the doubt and focused on the work. He'd designed 5 different weapon types based on human military history. Standard rifles firing armor-piercing rounds for precision work. Shotguns loaded with flechette shells for close-quarters combat. A jury-rigged grenade launcher using chemical explosives. Fragmentation devices that could be thrown or remotely detonated. And his most ambitious project, a railgun built from mining equipment that could fire projectiles at hypersonic speeds. "The railgun might not work," Marcus admitted as he inspected the weapon. "The power requirements are massive, and the barrel could melt after 3 shots. "We'd better make those 3 shots count," said a deep voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Thalven, a senior Korthan armorer who'd served for 30 years. The old soldier had 4 arms like Vreltoth, but his carapace was covered in scars. "Sir," Marcus straightened. "At ease, cadet." Thalven approached the workbench. "I hear you're bringing back the old ways." "Something like that, sir," Marcus said. Thalven picked up one of the rifles with surprising gentleness. "My species used weapons like this 4,000 years ago," he said, "before we joined the Coalition and adopted their advanced technology." He sighted down the barrel with practiced ease. "We thought becoming civilized meant abandoning violence," Thalven continued. "But maybe we just abandoned effectiveness in favor of sophistication." "That's what I'm hoping, sir," Marcus said. Thalven set the rifle down. I'm going with the response force, and I want to be part of your kinetic weapons team, he said. If these work, I want to remember what my ancestors knew. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Thal then said. We might all die proving you wrong. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of manufacturing and testing. Marcus's team grew to 12 volunteers from 6 different species. Most were cadets who'd watched the simulations and believed. Others were veterans like Thalven, who remembered older ways. They practiced loading and firing until the movements became automatic. The weapons were simple compared to energy rifles, but that simplicity meant fewer failure points. A rifle worked as long as you had ammunition and a working firing mechanism. No power cells to drain or plasma chambers to cool down. Just metal and chemistry and physics. This feels wrong, said Crixal as he struggled to hold a rifle with his crystalline body. Your people don't have hands, Marcus pointed out. We evolved past needing them, Crixal said. Which is exactly why this might work, Marcus replied. The Striders evolved to counter species that evolved past kinetic weapons. He helped Crixal attach the rifle to a mounting frame that could interface with his crystalline structure. Humanity never evolved past anything, Marcus continued. We just built tools to compensate and kept building better tools. An announcement echoed through the facility. All deployment personnel report to Hangar Bay 3. That's us, Thalvin said. The team gathered their weapons and headed for the hangar. The corridors were packed with soldiers and support staff. Marcus saw species he'd never encountered with bodies that defied description. They all moved with purpose and the weight of what they were about to face. The hangar bay was enormous, shuttles lined up like metal insects. Marcus's team was assigned to Shuttle 7 along with 20 Coalition Marines. The Marines watched the kinetic weapons team with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. You're the ones with the primitive guns? Asked a Marine sergeant with scales and 3 eyes. Yes, sir, Marcus said. I hope you're right about them, the sergeant said. Because if you're not, we're all dead anyway. The team loaded their equipment and strapped into crash seats. Marcus found himself sitting next to Vreltoth. Nervous, cadet? The instructor asked. Terrified, sir, Marcus admitted. Good, Vreltoth said. Fear keeps you sharp. He looked at the weapons secured in the cargo netting. I've been fighting for 40 years, and I never thought I'd carry a ballistic weapon into combat, he said. My ancestors would laugh at me. Or they'd understand, sir, Marcus said. Shuttle's engines roared to life, and Marcus felt the familiar sensation of artificial gravity compensating for acceleration. Through the viewport, he could see the other shuttles launching, and the massive cruisers moving into formation. We're looking at a 6-hour flight to Epsilon 7, announced the pilot. Command says the Striders hit the colony 4 hours ago. Marcus did the math in his head. They'd arrived 2 hours after first contact. 2 hours for the colony to evacuate. 2 hours for people to die if the evacuation failed. He pulled out his tablet and reviewed the tactical data one more time. The Striders always attacked population centers first. They seemed drawn to large concentrations of sapient beings. No one knew why, and no one had survived close observation long enough to study their behavior. His tablet beeped with an incoming call. Marcus accepted, and his younger sister's face appeared on the screen. Hey, Sarah said from Earth. She was supposed to be asleep given the time difference, but clearly wasn't. Hey yourself, Marcus tried to smile. Mom told me you're going into combat, Sarah said. How does Mom even know that? Marcus asked. She has friends in the Academy administration, Sarah replied. Are you going to be okay? Marcus wanted to lie but couldn't. I don't know, he said, but I have to try this. Because you can't leave a puzzle unsolved, Sarah said, even when the puzzle might kill you. Especially then, Marcus said. They talked for a few more minutes about nothing important. Sarah told him about her classes and her friends and the new dog their parents had adopted. Normal life things that felt surreal, while Marcus sat in a combat shuttle heading toward creatures that had destroyed 17 worlds. "I have to go," Marcus finally said. "Be careful," Sarah said. Said? And Marcus? "Even if you're wrong, you're still my hero for trying." The call ended, and Marcus sat back in his seat. Around him, the other team members were checking their weapons, or sleeping, or staring at nothing. Crixall's crystalline body caught the shuttle's internal lights, and made dancing patterns on the walls. "Do you have family?" Marcus asked his roommate. "Zephians form collective family groups," Crixall said. "My formation has 300 members." "That must be nice," Marcus said. "It is," Crixall agreed, "which is why I volunteered for this." He gestured at the weapons. "If your primitive human tools can stop the Striders, then 300 families like mine don't have to flee their homes." Thalvin spoke up from across the shuttle. "When I was young, I fought in the border wars," he said. "We used energy weapons and thought ourselves invincible." His four hands moved unconsciously, like they were holding invisible weapons. "Then we encountered an enemy that adapted to energy attacks," he continued. "We lost 3 entire battalions before we figured out new tactics." "What did you do?" Yella asked. "We got creative," Thalvin said. "Used the environment and psychological warfare and anything that wasn't standard doctrine." He looked at Marcus. "The Striders are the same challenge, and you're doing what we did then, thinking outside the accepted parameters." The 6 hours passed slowly. Some of the teens slept, but Marcus couldn't. He kept reviewing the data and running scenarios in his head. What if the simulations were wrong? What if the Striders had abilities they'd never demonstrated? What if his theory got people killed? "Stop spiraling," Vreltoth said quietly. "Sir?" "I can see it in your face," the instructor said. "You're second-guessing everything." "Asked?" "No," Vreltoth said firmly. "Second-guessing comes after combat, when you debrief and learn from mistakes." He leaned forward. "Right now you need to trust your training and your instincts and your research." "What if I'm wrong, sir?" "Then we fall back to evacuation protocol and orbital sterilization," Vreltoth said. "Same as we've always done." He smiled grimly. "But what if you're right?" The pilot's voice cut through the cabin. "Approaching Epsilon 7 system and transition to normal space in 30 seconds. Everyone stopped what they were doing. Marcus felt his heart hammering in his chest. "All personnel, prepare for combat deployment," the pilot continued. "Void Strider signatures confirmed on the surface." The shuttle shuddered as it dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Through the viewport, Marcus could see Epsilon 7, a blue-green world with 2 moons and orbital stations. Except half the stations were dark, and debris fields marked where others had been. "Multiple Strider contacts," the pilot's voice was strained. "Count shows 16 hostiles." 16. The largest concentration ever recorded in one location. Marcus looked at his rifle and thought about all the humans who'd carried similar weapons into impossible situations. Sometimes they'd won, sometimes they'd lost, but they'd always tried. "Lock and load," Thalvin ordered. "It's time to see if the old ways still work." The shuttle broke through Epsilon 7's atmosphere, and Marcus got his first view of the colony. What should have been a thriving settlement of 40,000 was now a war zone. Buildings burned, and streets were torn apart, and bodies lay where they'd fallen. 16 Void Striders moved through the destruction like shadows given terrible purpose. Coalition forces were already engaged, and Marcus watched through the viewport as plasma fire lit up the sky. Every shot passed through the Striders like they were made of smoke. Laser batteries from orbiting ships carved glowing lines through the air, but the creatures didn't even slow down. "This is Shuttle 7 requesting priority landing zone," their pilot called out. "-7, came the reply. "All zones are hot and recommend immediate withdrawal to evacuation ships." We have experimental weapons that might be effective, the pilot insisted. Say again, 7. Me, and we're coming in. The shuttle banked hard and dove toward the colony's defensive perimeter. Marcus could see Coalition Marines falling back in organized retreat while the Striders advanced. One creature reached out with a limb that seemed to be made of solid darkness and touched a Marine. The soldiers' shields flickered and died, and then the Marine collapsed. "Brace for hard landing," the pilot shouted. The shuttle hit the ground and skidded 50 meters before stopping. The rear hatch blew open, and Marcus stumbled out into chaos. Explosions echoed everywhere, and the air smelled like burning metal, and something else he couldn't identify. "Kinetic team, on me!" Falvin's voice cut through the noise. Marcus ran with his rifle held ready and found cover behind a demolished vehicle. The rest of his team spread out in a defensive formation. 50 meters away, a Void Strider was tearing through a Coalition squad. Energy weapons sparked uselessly against its form. "Target acquired," Falvin said calmly. "Weapons free." Marcus raised his rifle and sighted on the Strider's center mass. His finger found the trigger, and years of hunting with his grandfather steadied his hands. He fired 3 rounds in quick succession. The crack of gunfire sounded primitive and violent compared to the hum of energy weapons. All 3 bullets hit. The Void Strider staggered. It turned toward Marcus's position, and for the first time in recorded history, a Void Strider looked confused. "It's working," Yella shouted. "Keep firing." The kinetic team opened up with everything they had. Rifles barked, and shotguns roared, and the Strider actually went down. It tried to regenerate, but the constant kinetic impacts were overwhelming its recovery. "All Coalition forces," Falvin's voice boomed across the combat network. "Kinetic weapons are effective and requesting immediate support." Marcus watched as other teams registered what was happening. A battleship in orbit redirected its weapons, and instead of lasers, it began dropping mining charges. The heavy metal containers fell like meteors and hit with devastating impact. Striders that had been advancing suddenly found themselves under kinetic bombardment. One got hit by a 3-ton mining charge and was literally driven into the ground. "Press the attack," ordered a voice Marcus recognized as Fleet Commander Zelthar. "All units with mass-based weapons, engage the hostiles." The battle shifted. Construction mechs that normally moved cargo began throwing debris. Combat engineers rigged explosive charges using chemical propellants. Even Marines without kinetic weapons started throwing rocks and metal fragments. It should have been ridiculous, but the Striders were reeling. They'd spent 2 decades as unstoppable forces, and suddenly they were getting hurt. Marcus's team advanced and fired in controlled bursts. His rifle was heating up, and ammunition was running low, but he kept shooting. "Reload," he shouted, and dropped behind cover. His hands worked automatically and ejected the empty magazine and slammed a fresh one home. "Contact left," Torvin called out. A Strider had flanked them and was moving fast. Marcus swung his rifle around, but knew he couldn't aim in time. Krixal stepped forward with his crystalline body and the rifle mounted to his frame. The weapon fired, and the Strider's limbs shattered. "They're solid when attacking," Krixal said with excitement. "Just like you predicted." The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Marcus lost track of how many times he fired, or reloaded, or dove for cover. The kinetic weapons team worked like a machine, with each member covering the others. Falvin fought with 4 rifles, and his decades of experience made him devastating. Yella used her telepathic abilities to coordinate fire and predict Strider movements. Torvin's natural armor let him advance into positions others couldn't hold. They pushed the Striders back, meter by meter. Coalition forces rallied, and the creatures that had seemed invincible were now the ones retreating. "We're winning," Marcus said with disbelief. "Don't celebrate yet," Vreltoth warned. The ground shook. Something massive was moving beneath the colony. Buildings collapsed and streets split open, and from the destruction, emerged a strider unlike any they'd seen before. It stood 9 meters tall, with a body that seemed more solid than shadow. Its form was wrapped in layers of darkness that pulsed with alien energy. "That's new," Falvin said quietly. "Fleet Command, we have a large hostile." Reported. Designating target as Strider Prime. The massive creature turned toward the evacuation shuttles, where thousands of civilians were boarding. It moved with purpose and intelligence that the smaller Striders lacked. "It's going for the evacuation," Marcus realized. "All teams, converge on Strider Prime," Fleet Commander Zelthar ordered. "Do not let it reach those shuttles." Marcus ran. His legs burned and his lungs screamed, but he pushed harder. Around him, the entire kinetic team was sprinting toward the massive Strider. They opened fire from 200 meters out. Bullets sparked off the creature's hide, but didn't penetrate. It was more solid than the others, and more resilient. "We need heavier weapons," Torvin shouted. "The railgun," Marcus called back. "Where is it?" "Still in the shuttle," Yella replied. "I'll get it," Marcus said. "That's suicide," Crixal protested, ignored him, and changed direction. He sprinted back toward their landing zone while the rest of the team kept firing. The railgun was strapped to the shuttle's interior, and he wrestled it free. The weapon was heavy and awkward, and he could barely lift it. He activated the power cell, and the weapon hummed to life. Warning indicators flashed, because the barrel was already overheating from just the startup sequence. Marcus hoisted the railgun onto his shoulder and aimed at Strider Prime. The creature was only 100 meters from the evacuation shuttles. "Come on," Marcus muttered, and squeezed the trigger. The railgun fired with a sound like thunder. The projectile left the barrel at 4 kilometers per second. It hit Strider Prime dead center and punched completely through its body. The creature staggered and let out a sound that made Marcus's teeth hurt. But it didn't fall. It turned toward him, and Marcus saw something in its movements that looked like anger. "Oh no," he said. The railgun's barrel was glowing red, and the power cell was at 15%. He had maybe 2 more shots before the weapon melted or exploded. Strider Prime advanced on his position. Marcus fired again. Another hit, but the creature kept coming. The power cell dropped to 3%. One more shot, just one. But Strider Prime was adapting, and its form was shifting to become less solid. Marcus's mind raced through everything he'd learned about the Striders. They phased through matter and absorbed energy, and regenerated from almost anything. Almost anything. What couldn't they regenerate from? He thought about the explosive rounds, and how fragmentation had been effective. He thought about chemical reactions that didn't rely on energy absorption. He thought about the oldest weapon humanity had ever discovered: fire. "Falven," Marcus shouted into his comm. "I need every incendiary device we have." "What are you planning?" the Corthan replied. "Something stupid," Marcus admitted. "Bring them to my position and tell everyone to fall back." Strider Prime was 50 meters away and closing. Marcus could feel the wrongness radiating from it, like standing near a black hole. His team arrived with arms full of jury-rigged incendiary charges. They were supposed to be used for controlled demolition, but Marcus had modified them during the flight. Each one was packed with thermite that could burn at over 2,000 degrees. "This is insane," Crixal said. "You'll be caught in the blast." "Then I'd better throw them really well," Marcus replied. He looked at his team and saw fear and determination in equal measure. "Get to the evacuation shuttles," he ordered. "That's not happening," Falven said. "We don't abandon our own." There wasn't time to argue. Strider Prime was 30 meters away and gathering itself for what looked like a final charge. Marcus grabbed an incendiary charge and armed it. "When I throw this, everyone fires everything you have left," he said. "We make it count." He stood up from cover, and the massive Strider focused on him. Its form was shifting between solid and phase states like it couldn't decide which to use. Marcus threw the incendiary with all his strength. It arced through the air, and Strider Prime's limb shot out to knock it aside. The moment it made contact, the charge detonated. Thermite exploded in a white-hot inferno. Strider Prime screamed. The kinetic team opened fire and emptied their weapons into the burning mass. Marcus threw 2 more incendiaries, and they detonated in sequence. The creature was burning, and its form was collapsing. If you could phase through matter, chemical combustion happened in physical space, and created heat that had to go somewhere. Strider Prime tried to absorb the energy, but there was too much. It tried to phase away, but the thermite was consuming its form. Marcus watched as the massive creature collapsed into burning fragments. The smaller striders around the battlefield suddenly froze. Then they began retreating and fading into dimensional rifts. Within seconds they were gone. The battlefield went quiet, except for the crackling of fires and the moans of wounded. Marcus dropped to his knees, and his hands were shaking. "Did we just win?" Yella asked quietly. "I think we did," Falven replied. The comm channels erupted with voices. "Confirm Strider Prime is down. All hostile contacts retreating. Evacuation shuttles are clear. Someone find out what weapon killed that thing." Marcus, and pulled him to his feet. "You did it," the instructor said. "We did it," Marcus corrected. He looked at his team, and then at the coalition forces that had fought beside them. Everyone did it. In the distance, the evacuation shuttles were lifting off with thousands of saved lives. For the first time in 23 years, the coalition had won a fight against the Void Striders. And they'd done it with weapons that were older than most civilizations in the galaxy. Marcus's rifle was smoking, and his body ached, and he was pretty sure he'd have nightmares about this for years. But they'd won. Humanity's stubbornness and refusal to accept impossible had saved 40,000 lives. "Come on," Falven said. "We need medical attention, and then we need to report what worked." Marcus nodded, and let himself be led toward the medical shuttles. Behind them, Epsilon 7 burned, but it wasn't empty ashes. Colony that would be rebuilt. A world that didn't have to be sterilized from orbit. All because someone had asked, "What if?" and been too stubborn to accept, "No weapon can stop them." Marcus woke up in the Academy Medical Bay 3 days after the battle at Epsilon 7. His body was covered in Bacta patches, and the medical scanner showed he'd suffered second-degree burns and severe muscle strain. But he was alive. The first face he saw was Crixal, standing beside his bed, with crystalline features that somehow managed to look relieved. "You've been unconscious for 60 hours, his roommate said. "The doctor said you pushed yourself too hard, and your body basically shut down." Marcus tried to sit up, and immediately regretted it. "Easy," Crixal said. "You're still healing." "What happened after?" Marcus asked. "After you killed a Strider Prime with thermite and saved 40,000 people?" Crixal made his crystalline laugh sound. "You became the most famous cadet in Coalition history." Over the next hour, Crixal filled him in. The battle at Epsilon 7 had been broadcast across the entire Coalition. Every species in the galaxy had watched as kinetic weapons proved effective against an enemy that had been unstoppable for 23 years. Fleet Command had immediately begun analyzing the combat data. Research teams were studying how the Striders' phase shift abilities interacted with physical mass. And most importantly, no one was calling Marcus crazy anymore. "Vreltoth came by twice to check on you," Crixal said. "He looks at you differently now." "How?" Marcus asked. "Like you're a soldier instead of a student," Crixal replied. The door to the medical bay opened, and Falven entered with his 4 arms, carrying what looked like a formal package. "Cadet Chen," the Corthan said, "you're awake, and that's good because you have visitors." Behind him came Fleet Commander Zelthar, 3 other high-ranking officers, and Vreltoth. Marcus tried to stand at attention, but his body wouldn't. "Cooperate. P. Stay seated, cadet, Zelthar said. The fleet commander was a Quellan like Yella, but older with telepathic abilities so strong that Marcus could feel the pressure of them. What you did in Epsilon 7 changed everything, Zelthar continued. For the first time since the Void Striders appeared, we won, and that victory came because you refused to accept conventional wisdom. One of the officers stepped forward and opened the formal package. Inside was a medal that Marcus didn't recognize. The Coalition Star of Valor, the officer said, awarded for exceptional courage in combat and innovative thinking that saved countless lives. They pinned the medal to Marcus's hospital gown, and it felt surreal. There's more, Zelthar said. Your kinetic weapons theory has been validated, and we're implementing it fleet-wide. He pulled up a holographic display showing manufacturing facilities across dozens of worlds. Coalition World, with industrial capacity, is now producing ballistic weapons based on your designs, Zelthar explained. We're retrofitting ships with railguns and mass drivers, and we're training soldiers in kinetic warfare. Marcus felt overwhelmed. I just asked a question, sir, he said. You asked the right question, Vreltov spoke up. One that 3,000 years of military doctrine told us not to ask. The officers left after a few more formal statements, but Vreltov stayed behind. He sat heavily in a chair that creaked under his Korthan weight. I need to tell you something, the instructor said. When you first asked about kinetic weapons in my class, I thought you were naive, and that human stubbornness was getting in the way of your education. He looked at Marcus directly. I was wrong, and my arrogance nearly cost us a weapon that could save billions. You approved my testing, sir, Marcus pointed. After you pushed hard enough that I couldn't ignore you, Vreltov replied. A better instructor would have encouraged that thinking from the start. He stood up. The Academy is changing its curriculum because of you, and we're adding classes on unconventional warfare and historical weapon systems and the importance of questioning established doctrine. That's good, sir, Marcus said. It is, Vreltov agreed, but it also means you've set a very high bar for future cadets. After the instructor left, Marcus slept for another 12 hours. When he woke again, the medical bay was quiet, and the only visitor was his sister on a video call. You look terrible, Sarah said with a smile. Thanks, Marcus replied. Mom and Dad are losing their minds, she continued. You're all over the news, and they keep showing footage of you charging at that giant strider thing. I'd rather not think about that. Admitted. Too late, Sarah said. You're a hero, and everyone at school keeps asking me questions about you. They talked for an hour, about nothing important, and it was exactly what Marcus needed. Just normal life, and normal problems, and a reminder that the galaxy was bigger than just war. 2 weeks later, Marcus was released from medical care. His burns had healed, and his body had recovered, but the doctors warned him about pushing too hard. You're young, but not invincible, the head physician said. Remember that. Marcus returned to his quarters and found them filled with messages from people across the galaxy. Some thanked him for saving their colonies. Others asked technical questions about weapon design. A few were from humans on Earth who wanted to know if he was single. You're famous, Crixel said. This is weird. Very weird, Marcus agreed. Classes resumed, but everything was different. Marcus was moved to an advanced tactical course, and other cadets looked at him with a mix of awe and curiosity. The Academy had indeed changed its curriculum, and now every cadet had to take a class called Unconventional Problem Solving in Combat Scenarios. Vreltov taught the first session, and used Marcus's kinetic weapons theory as a case study. The lesson here isn't about guns, the instructor told the class. It's about recognizing when progress has made us blind to older solutions. Marcus sat in the back and tried not to be embarrassed as Vreltov displayed his research notes. Cadet Chen asked a simple question. Have we tried this? Vreltov continued. That question saved Epsilon 7, and might save countless other colonies. A new cadet raised her hand. But sir, how do we know when to question doctrine and when to trust it? That's the hard part, Vreltoth admitted, and it requires judgment and critical thinking and the courage to be wrong. After class, Marcus was approached by a dozen cadets asking questions. He answered what he could, but mostly felt out of his depth. This is exhausting, he told Crixall later. Welcome to being important, his roommate replied. I didn't ask for this, Marcus said. No, Crixall agreed. But you earned it. 3 months after the battle at Epsilon 7, the first Coalition ships equipped with kinetic weapons entered service. Marcus was invited to the commissioning ceremony for the CNS Determination, a cruiser that mounted both energy weapons and railguns. He stood on the observation deck and watched as the ship ran through weapons tests. Plasma cannons fired in brilliant blue streams. Then the railguns activated and launched projectiles at relativistic speeds. The combination was devastating. Beautiful, isn't it? Said a voice beside him. Thalvin, in dress uniform. Sir. Marcus started to salute, but the Corthan waved it away. We're off duty, Thalvin said, and I wanted to tell you something. The old soldier looked at the ship with an expression Marcus couldn't read. When I first joined the military, I learned to use energy weapons because that's what everyone used, Thalvin said. I forgot that my ancestors had fought with simpler tools and won great victories. He turned to Marcus. You reminded the entire coalition that new isn't always better, and sometimes the answer is in what we left behind. I just got lucky, sir, Marcus said. Luck is being prepared when opportunity arrives, Thalvin replied. You were prepared because you studied and questioned, and refused to accept that's how we've always done it. More ships were being commissioned every week. The Void Striders had attacked 2 more colonies since Epsilon 7, and both times, Coalition forces had driven them off using kinetic weapons. Casualties were still high, but they were winning. Worlds didn't have to be sterilized anymore. People didn't have to evacuate their homes. The galaxy was learning to fight back. 6 months after the battle, Marcus returned to the experimental range where he'd first tested his theory. The range was busier now, with cadets training on various kinetic weapons. He watched a hexapod instructor teaching proper rifle stance, and a Zephian showing others how to calculate projectile trajectories. Hard to believe this was empty 6 months ago, Crixall said beside him. Yeah, Marcus agreed. They walked to the far end of the range, where a memorial had been erected. It listed the names of everyone who died at Epsilon 7 before the kinetic team arrived. 47 civilians, 12 Coalition Marines, 3 support staff. We saved 40,000, quietly, but we couldn't save everyone. No one can save everyone, Crixall replied. But you saved more than anyone thought possible. A group of new cadets approached, led by an instructor Marcus didn't recognize. Cadet Chen? The instructor asked. That's me, Marcus said. Would you be willing to demonstrate kinetic weapons for my class? The instructor asked. They're learning the history, and it would mean a lot to hear from the person who started it all. Marcus looked at Crixall, who made an encouraging gesture. Sure, Marcus said. He picked up a standard rifle from the range equipment. It was a newer model based on his original design, but improved by Coalition engineers. This is a Mark 7 kinetic rifle, Marcus began. It fires solid projectiles using chemical propellants, and the design is based on human weapons from 300 years ago. The cadets listened intently as he explained the principles. How kinetic weapons bypassed phase shift technology. How chemical reactions couldn't be absorbed like energy. How sometimes the simplest solution was the right one. But the most important lesson, Marcus said as he finished, isn't about weapons at all. He looked at the cadets from a dozen different species. It's about being willing to question what everyone thinks is true, he continued. The Coalition spent 3,000 years building more advanced technology, and forgot that advanced doesn't always mean effective. He held up the rifle. This weapon is primitive by galactic standards, but it works because the Void Striders never evolved to counter it. A cadet in the front row spoke up. What if there are other enemies we can't beat with current weapons? Then we do what we did with the Striders, Marcus replied. We look at old solutions and new approaches, and we refuse to accept that anything is impossible. The class ended, and the cadets filed out, talking excitedly about their next training session. Marcus stayed behind and looked at the range. This was where it all started, with a simple test and a crazy theory. You changed the galaxy, Crixall said. We changed it, Marcus corrected. You and Falven and Yella and Torven and everyone who believed when it seemed crazy. They walked back toward the main academy building and past training facilities that were now teaching kinetic warfare alongside energy weapons. The galaxy was adapting, learning that older didn't mean obsolete, understanding that progress sometimes meant going backward to move forward. Marcus's tablet chimed with a new message. It was from Fleet Command requesting his input on a new weapon design that combined kinetic and energy systems. They want you to consult, Crixall said. I'm still a cadet, Marcus pointed out. The cadet who proved that impossible just means nobody's tried the right approach yet, Crixall replied. Marcus accepted the message and started reading through the technical specifications. The design was interesting and flawed, and potentially brilliant, just like his original theory had been. You know what's funny? Marcus said. What? Crixall asked. Before I came to the academy, I was just a kid from Montana who liked hunting with his grandfather, Marcus said. Now I'm apparently changing military doctrine across hundreds of worlds. That's what happens when humans get stubborn, Crixall replied. We bring that refusal to accept limitations, and the willingness to try things that seem crazy, and the terrifying habit of setting things on fire when nothing else works, Marcus added with a smile. That too, Crixall agreed. They reached their quarters, and Marcus sat down at his desk. Orbital platforms where new weapons were being tested. Ships moving in formations that combined old tactics with new technology. A galaxy learning to fight back against an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. All because someone asked, what if, and was too stubborn to accept no for an answer. Marcus pulled up the weapon design specifications and started making notes. There was work to do. Problems to solve. Questions to ask that nobody else was asking. And somewhere out in the dark between stars, the Void Striders were learning that humanity had joined the Coalition and brought with them something dangerous. Not superior technology or physical strength or special abilities, but the absolute refusal to let impossible be the final answer. Marcus smiled and got to work. After all, the galaxy wasn't going to save itself.